When we talk about the US tax system, it's almost always about politics, right? Republicans versus Democrats, who pays what. But what if we're missing the bigger picture? What if there's a deeper pattern at play, a kind of hidden rhythm that shapes how these massive systems evolve and maybe even how they break? Today, we're going to look at federal revenue from a totally different angle, not as a political football, but as a complex system that might be heading for a predictable tipping point.
So let's just get right to it with a big question. Is the current system we use to collect taxes sustainable? I mean, are all the cracks and strains we're seeing just normal, or are they signs that something huge, a fundamental change, is just over the horizon? That's the mystery we're going to explore.
Okay, so before we can even think about looking into the future, we have to get a really clear picture of what's happening right now. Think of it like this. There are some serious warning lights blinking on the dashboard of the US tax system, and we need to understand what they're telling us.
You've got all these different forces squeezing the system from all sides. The tax code itself, it's become so incredibly complex that just enforcing it is a massive challenge. Then you've got all these new ways of making money. Digital income, the gig economy, that the old system just wasn't built to handle. All of this is happening while federal debt keeps climbing and the political friction is, well, constant. It's not just one problem, it's a perfect storm of pressure.
So, we can all see the strain. But here's a thought. What if this isn't just a random collection of problems? What if all this chaos is actually part of a predictable, universal pattern of change? Let's try looking at this whole thing through a completely different lens.
This new lens is a framework called Triune Harmonic Dynamics, or THD for short. Now, the core idea here is surprisingly simple. It suggests that all systems, and I mean everything, from nature to technology to our own society, evolve through the same repeating three-step dance. They emerge, then they face a period of conflict and tension, and then finally, they integrate into a new, more stable form.
And this framework comes from the work of a researcher, inventor, and author named Kevin L. Brown. His whole point is that this isn't just some philosophical idea or abstract theory. He argues that it's a measurable, testable principle that we can actually use to forecast how complex systems will change over time.
So let's quickly walk through that cycle again. It always kicks off with emergence. That's just the birth of something new. That's followed by contrast, which is the messy part, the stress, the challenges, the conflict that test the system. And it all resolves with integration, where the system reorganizes itself into a new, more advanced state. It's this simple three-beat rhythm that acts as the engine of all change.
Now don't worry, you don't need to be a mathematician to get this, but it's important to know that the THD framework is built on an actual mathematical model. There's an equation behind it all. You can think of it as a tool that helps us measure the intensity of that three-phase cycle we just talked about. And that is the key that lets us go from a general theory about change to a specific, measurable forecast for a system like our taxes.
So how does this actually apply to the US tax system? Well, let's use the framework to take a measurement. The goal here is to calculate the current level of structural pressure and pinpoint exactly where we are in that three-phase cycle.
To do that, the THD analysis zooms in on these four key areas. You've got debt stress, the more debt, the more pressure to collect revenue, compliance complexity, the harder it is to file taxes, the more strain on everyone. Verification lag, which is just a fancy way of saying enforcement can't keep up with new forms of income. And finally, institutional rigidity, meaning the system itself is just old and struggles to adapt.
So, after feeding these four pressure points into the THD model, the analysis generates one single number, a structural pressure score of 33 out of a possible 40. This is our key measurement. Okay, so what in the world does a 33 actually mean? Well, according to the model, any score in that 26 to 40 range puts a system in a zone with a high probability of reorganization. That score tells us that the U.S. revenue system is at the very end of that tense, stressful contrast phase, and it's getting ready to shift into the final integration phase.
And this high-pressure score leads us directly to the central forecast of this whole analysis. So what exactly does this coming integration phase look like?
The prediction is clear and incredibly direct. We are not talking about small tweaks like changing a few tax rates or closing loopholes. The forecast is for a fundamental, structural change in the very architecture of how the U.S. government collects its money. This phase probability matrix breaks it down really nicely. You can say right here that the integration phase, which again means major structural change, has the highest probability at 40%. The system is more likely to reorganize itself than it is to just stay in its current high-pressure state or try to go back to the way things were. Now, to be perfectly clear, This isn't about predicting which political party is going to be in charge. It's a forecast about the logic of the system itself. The model predicts a shift to a much simpler, more direct way of collecting revenue. So think less about complex income tax forms and more about taxing consumption and transactions directly, through things like a national sales tax, a VAT system, or other models you see here.
And the forecast even comes with a specific timeline. The window for this big reorganization is predicted to open up in 2029. The point of peak probability for that change to happen is late 2031, and the entire window closes by 2033. This makes the forecast concrete, something we can actually watch for.
Okay, a big prediction is one thing, but how can we actually test it? The real strength of this kind of framework is that it gives us specific, measurable conditions that will either prove it's on the right track or prove it's totally wrong. This is what makes it a scientific forecast, not just a guess.
So here are the signals to keep an eye on. If we start to see serious Treasury funding issues, or we see major legislative proposals for things like a national sales tax, or if the current IRS system just shows more and more strain and signs of failure, well, those would be strong indicators that the forecast is on track.
And just as importantly, here's how we'll know if the forecast was a miss. If we get to 2033 and the current income tax system is still fundamentally in place without any major shift to a new kind of logic, then the prediction is invalid. It's a really clear pass-fail test.
So we're left with this fascinating question. We have a framework, we have a pressure reading, and we have a specific testable forecast. Will the U.S. revenue system really follow this predictable pattern toward a complete reorganization? According to this analysis, the signals are already there, and the next decade is going to give us the answer.